We cannot have these types of hiring practices, whether it be in the FAA or any other area of the federal government, because lives can be put at risk.
This plane crash in Washington, D.C. is being blamed by some Republicans, including by Donald Trump, in part at least, on DEI in the FAA. Do you think that diversity hiring, led to this plane crash?
Well, there's a couple things that we know for sure. Number one, the FAA has had this under the Biden administration specifically. And number two, something went horribly wrong with respect to the Reagan airspace, and that is a highly congested airspace. You had military operations going on there, Joint Base Andrews right across the river from Reagan. There's so much that is happening in a very short amount of space. It's going to take time for us to figure out exactly what's happening. The one thing that I can say definitively is that we cannot have these types of hiring practices, whether it be in the FAA or any other area of the federal government, because lives can be put at risk, whether it was the cause of this or not. We'll have to ensure that we are hiring people and have enough people on staff that are able to do their job well, because if standards like this that don't put the best and the brightest in our workforce continue to go forward, then there's no telling what sort of havoc it might be able to wreak.
And what kind of impact do you think DEI has had more generally on the federal government over the last 4 years? Has it made Americans safer?
Well, it's really been racism just in a different direction. It has been propping up individuals that have looked for different positions and jobs, but might not have been able to meet the requirements or the standards that have been put in place for hiring practices. And that's not good for the federal government. Look, if somebody goes to a school and they work really hard and they graduate and they are proficient in a certain area and they have all of the technical skills that they need, they should not be kicked out of a job position or a job running or not be eligible to be in a position just because they might be a white or a straight male, which historically over the last few years has been something that has happened. People have been discriminated against just because they're not a person who is a minority or somebody in another protected class or something like that. We need to make sure that we are vetting individuals who can do the job the best. And we can have a conversation about education and opportunities and allowing for a wide myriad of individuals that all have the same chance in the United States of America. There shouldn't be these racist DEI hiring practices. We should hire people based off of merit, and that's what Donald Trump's wanting to get back to.
The Democrats would argue that it's very important to have representation of ethnic minorities within different institutions, and that historically, for example, black people have faced more discrimination against them and therefore they deserve a bit of a boost now. And they could also argue that in the FAA there wasn't enough black people, or as President Trump quoted yesterday, there wasn't enough psychologically impaired people, that wasn't diverse enough. So what do you say to this argument that, we need these minorities to give them representation and so on?
In America, we have equal opportunity at the very beginning. It does not mean that we have equal outcome. There are enormous opportunities for folks in America. Just look at JD Vance, somebody who grew up in a very poverty-stricken area, who had mother who had a ton of drug issues, overcame all of these challenges, worked his way up, became a Marine, and now finds himself as the Vice President of the United States of America. Anybody can do that in the U.S. That is our country. That is how we operate. So it doesn't mean that because you might graduate with a lower GPA, but you're part of this particular class or this particular class, you get an advantage just because of that. You have to graduate and get these positions based off of merit. The same opportunities that exist to me exist to anybody else that is born in the United States of America. You have that opportunity to climb up and make sure that you are the very best version of yourself you can possibly be.
I know that Donald Trump has signed various executive orders trying to ban DEI in the federal government. Do you think this will be successful, because the Democrats may use the courts and other means to try and resist this banning of DEI?
I think it'll be successful, especially right at the beginning, but it was going to be a battle because a lot of folks have already swapped around titles and embedded themselves in these different agencies, and they'll probably likely continue these practices. And it's not like you can just have one across-the-board order and fix everything. That sets the tone and the directive and eliminates a lot at the top. But a lot of these policies have been deeply embedded in other areas of the federal government. So I do think it's going to be successful. It may end up getting challenged in the court, but I think that we welcome that conversation. I think that if we have that open discussion and present the evidence and say, this is why DEI hurts individuals and is racist, then that will allow for us to make a very strong argument. We believe as Republicans, as conservatives, the facts are on our side. And frankly, I think the American public will be on our side once they hear exactly how individuals have been discriminated against. Because let's be very clear, as I've said before, DEI is discrimination. It's just in a different direction. And we should have an equal playing field for everybody trying to go into the workforce.
And when it comes to President Trump's cabinet picks, I know he's been going through some confirmation hearings recently. Do you feel they're the most competent people, you know, Pete Hegseth and RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard and so on? These aren't DEI hires in your mind?
They're not DEI hires at all. In fact, the left has railed against them and criticized them for not being DEI hires. Essentially, you've seen a complete reversal, a 180 from the Biden administration. And the other part is this. They're not folks that the swamp is generally familiar with. They're not people who are in the Rolodexes of the lobbyist over on Kill Street. They can't be bought. This is part of a disruptive class. I call it Donald Trump's suicide squad against the swamp. This is a group of individuals that the entrenched interest in Washington, D.C. are very dismayed to see come into town because they say they don't have the appropriate experience. They don't have all of the credentials or the qualifications. But the fact is what they're referring to is that they've not been on the board of a lot of these large organizations that stand to profit off of lobbyists and special interests being able to bend their ear. That is a good thing. Shaking up the town with people that have real-life work experience, like Tulsi Gabbard being in the military, and Pete Hegseth having also served and run organizations and coming into this position, that allows individuals who are at the bottom and then all the way up to the top to have their voices heard, because these folks that are now leading departments had been in the trenches with just the normal workforce.
And do you think that Trump's cabinet picks are all going to be confirmed, particularly the most controversial ones, like I said, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and so on?
I'll say that if any of his picks are not confirmed, the Republican senators that vote against the nominees could very well expect a primary challenge in their backyard, and a well-funded primary challenge at that. So if some of these Republican senators who want to seek re-election, especially some trying to seek it very soon, want to come back into office and they vote against Donald Trump's nominees, they very well better have a war chest the size of some small countries' GDP in order to fight back against it.
Are you impressed with the performance of JD Vance in the last few days? He's, taken some press conferences and interviews and so on. You mentioned he came from nothing and has become the vice president. Is he doing well so far?
JD Vance is doing especially well at also addressing a lot of the forgotten men and women of America and elevating their interests. He has an overcomer story. So he has been able to go out there and take the mantle of the MAGA movement. I think there's very bright things ahead of him in the Republican Party. I don't think this is the top job that he's going to have. I think that he might have presidential aspirations at some point. And if he continues fighting for President Trump and delivering on that agenda, I think we might very well be able to see that in the near future.
And how do you see how do you see the media handling the second Trump presidency? I know JD has done a lot of interviews, so has Trump as well. Do you think the media are being fair on Donald Trump and his second presidency?
The media is never going to be fair to Republicans. They're never going to be fair to conservatives. You saw the media over the last year actually start to turn against the Biden administration a little bit. They started to get a little frustrated and actually start to treat them a little more hostile than they normally traditionally have. But they have always been hostile to Republicans and particularly to President Trump. What I like about the president is that a lot of the media that is in the White House briefing room right now are from non-traditional outlets. They're folks that have been part of podcast networks or ones that have an audience that generally has not been tuning into the mainstream media narrative. That's to address a lot of the voting blocks that came in and supported President Trump in this past election that historically have tuned out politics in general. So it's encouraging to see how the Trump administration has responded to the media, and they're not ignorant on this. They'll know exactly how the media operates, and they were prepared going into this. So watching the presidential administration of Donald Trump come back into office and start to be a little more aggressive towards these members of the media that are very hostile towards them, I think is a good tone to strike at the beginning. They're not playing around.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the GBN America YouTube channel.